Okay, our last section for this week looks at John chapters 3 and 4, questions 7 through 10. Question 7 says, list at least 3 similarities between Jesus' conversation with Nicodemus and his conversation with the woman at the well. Then number 8 says, list at least 3 differences. I'll give just a number of the similarities that we discussed in our Bible study this week, and also a number of the differences, so it'll be a little more than 3. Some of the similarities between the two, someone mentioned this, I had never thought of this, is that both of them met Jesus at awkward times. Nicodemus at night, the woman at the middle of the day. Of course, the middle of the day was not when women went to the well. It was the hottest portion of the day. And of course, at night, that was a time for sleeping and not for private interviews with Jesus. So both of them met Jesus at an awkward time. Also, it can be highlighted that both of these interactions were personal. Both of these was one-on-one. Jesus with Nicodemus alone, Jesus with the woman at the well alone. A very important point of that is that it's very rare that you get a personal conversation with most anyone, especially today. We're so busy, we don't have many times of just private, one-on-one, face-to-face communication. And more importantly, you don't get these kinds of private interviews with very public figures or people who have a lot to do like Jesus. I think it can show part of Jesus' priorities, that he thought that it was more important for him to spend this personal time with Nicodemus, this personal time with this woman at the well, more important than spending more time healing more people, more time spending with a big sermon. He could have preached to a few thousand people during the time he spent, wasted, we would say, with these two individuals. But Jesus prioritized this personal interview, this personal time with these people above the other things that he could have been doing. And so I think Jesus validates the importance of each individual. Also, another similarity is that in both instances, he uses analogies. With Nicodemus, he uses the analogy of the wind, said the wind blows wherever it wants, and he uses that to depict the work of the Spirit of those who are born again. Then he also says with the woman at the well, he uses the analogy of water, which was very close to her. She was at a well. And so in both instances, he uses analogies to communicate his point, analogies that were accessible to them. Both of them could understand. They knew what it was like to feel the wind, Nicodemus' case. She knew what it was like to experience water, to drink from water and be thirsty again. And he used analogies that were very practical for their circumstances, that they could understand the truth through. And so that's another similarity. Another similarity is that Jesus answered questions they didn't ask. In both cases, Jesus took them places in the conversation that they didn't initiate. He kind of shifted it and took them to, yes, questions they didn't ask, but questions that they needed answers to. I mean, that's a great point that we see of Jesus, that he knows more than ourselves, more than we ourselves know about what we need to learn and when we need to learn it as well. And we see that as a similarity. I'll shift here to the differences between the two. Of course, there are many differences. The first and probably most primary is the people themselves. Jesus was speaking to Nicodemus, very educated, likely very proud ruler of the Jews, a Pharisee. And he goes from that, who would be the top of the social strata in that area, all the way to the bottom, a woman from Samaria who had been divorced multiple times. And the differences can't be overemphasized. I mean, these are two very different people, which I think shows very strongly that Jesus can meet anyone. Jesus is not just the God of the Jews. He's not just the God of the Samaritans. He's not just the God of the whites. He's not the God of the blacks. He's not the God only of the Europeans or the Asians or the Hispanics. He is a God who can meet anyone. If you're highly educated, sophisticated, proud, perhaps, a ruler of the Jews, if you're a lawyer, a doctor, I'm not saying lawyers and doctors are proud, but if you're highly educated, a very sophisticated individual, Jesus has something to say to you. And also, if you're on the lower end of the social economic spectrum, the lower end of the educational spectrum, Jesus has something to say to you. And I think we need to be careful when we put Jesus too close to either category. If we make him too overcomplicated, too sophisticated, too academic in our approach to Jesus, that's a danger. But also if we make him just too and only low or simple, I should say, for what we perceive him to be needing to reach people in that area. I think we need to make sure we show Jesus is a man for every human. He's the perfect match for any human, and he can meet any kind of human wherever they are. Another difference between the two is that Jesus, again, speaking to Nicodemus, used an example from the Old Testament. He said, just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up. That's the figure that he used to speak. And that was a pretty advanced interpretation of that passage in the Old Testament. But when he's speaking to the woman, he sticks to very plain, very simple examples, highlighting the water connection. Also, for both of them, another difference between the two of them was that the woman, of course, ended very certain, very confident in her faith in Jesus, whereas Nicodemus was not as confident and doesn't fully accept publicly Jesus until after Jesus' death and ascension. Another difference as well is that Jesus initiated the conversation with the woman at the well. Nicodemus initiated the conversation with Jesus. Also, Nicodemus probably came to Jesus a little confident in his worthiness to approach Jesus, whereas the woman at the well, she explicitly says, how is it that you, being a Jew, asked for water from me, who is a woman of Samaria? So she comes to him very humble and not at all confident in her worthiness to speak to him. Jesus himself initiated that conversation, whereas Nicodemus felt very confident in his worthiness to come. And also Jesus then, in response to Nicodemus, brings him a bit lower. And then again, there are difference in their final response. So those are some of the similarities and differences between the two. There are many others, of course, that I didn't mention. But again, I think they do a great job of showing us, and that's what question 9 is focusing on, the way that Jesus is able to relate to people. It's the same and it's different. He is able to meet all people of all classes, of all backgrounds, of all social positions, but also he's very specific in how he reaches those people. And I think it can give a lesson to us of how he wants to communicate to us. He wants to communicate to me as me. He doesn't want to communicate to me the same way he communicates to you, because I'm not you and you are not me. And I think that's a very important point in our relationship with him, emphasizing the personal nature of his communication. And then also in our communicating the gospel to others, we need to be aware of that. Jesus is able to meet all kinds of people.